Hey YouTube, Kevin Cleary with a knife video. Today I've got a blade that is extremely cool and actually rather significant in terms of some of the things that it does differently for the knife industry. This is the Lionsteel Tispine. As you can already see, it's a very, very beautiful knife. It comes in a number of different finishes. This is the matte finish with bronze anodization on the handle. The reason this knife is cool, the reason it's significant is primarily because of the construction, okay? This handle is milled from one solid piece of titanium. So it's not two sides of a frame put together with standoffs or something. This whole frame is one solid piece of titanium. So both sides, the lock bar, all of it is cut from a single piece. Now that is really cool, and it's using a particular machining process that is, that Lionsteel was the first to use for knives. They won a few years ago Knife of the Year, maybe Imported Knife of the Year at Blade Show for the Lionsteel SR1, which is a great knife. I do have a video on that, so you may want to look that up. This is another offering from them, the Tispine. Now the Tispine departs significantly from the SR1 in terms of philosophy. The SR1 was more of a hard use knife. This is more of a gentleman's folder or light use EDC. You know, I'm not suggesting that it's not high quality and durable, but it's slim, it's very slight, it's rather lightweight. Although I will say it's a little heavy for its size. We'll get to that later. This is a very classy, elegant knife, where the SR1 was more of a durable, heavy-duty folding knife. So let's get into some of the specifics on this. We'll start with size and weight the way we normally do. Size on this is 7 and 11/16. Okay, so just a little over 7 and 5/8. The blade is 3 1/4 inches. The handle is 4 and 7/16. So that's a fairly small blade especially for me. Generally I like my knives to be at least 8 inches. I do make exceptions now and again for particular pieces that are really cool. Certainly this fits that bill. It's done some exceptional things. So because of that, I don't mind the smaller size. Although I will say I don't carry this that often because of that size. Generally I want a larger knife on my person than this. Now, the weight on this is 3.5 ounces, and that's one of the things that is a little questionable about this knife. For its size, 3.5 ounces is actually quite heavy. Here is the Benchmade 943. It's almost exactly the same size. Right down, you know, it might be a 1/16 of an inch different, but it weighs a good ounce less. You know, this is about 2.5 ounces. Maybe not even that. And so that's sort of the weight that I would need this to be in order to say, hey, really well done on the weight. If you notice in here, and I'll try to show you this when I zoom in a little bit, but if you look inside the frame, you'll notice that they haven't milled this out very far back. So you would look at this and see how it's hollow in here and go, oh yeah, you know, all of this portion, I'm going to show it this way so you can see easier, all of this must be hollowed out, but in fact it's not. So from here down by my finger all the way kind of up in this direction is all solid titanium, and that adds a fair bit of weight. The other thing that adds weight is this is a fairly thick blade with a fairly thick grind, and we'll talk about that again when we kind of move on a little later. But those two things add weight to a knife that I think ought to be, as you hold it in hand and as you look at it, it feels like sort of a slim, sleek, elegant gentleman's folder. But then when you feel it, it feels just a little too heavy for that roll, okay? It's not really too heavy, it's only 3.5 ounces, but it just feels heavy for what it is, okay? And you know, I brought in the Benchmade to kind of make that comparison. So let's zoom in and get some closer views on this blade. There we go, I'm gonna move this way this time just for a little bit of a change. So there you go. You should be able to get a better close-up on that now. Now, let's start with the blade and talk about that, and we'll kind of move on from there. And I'll show you some of those things that I've already mentioned as we go along. Before we do, let me, actually, you know what? I've got some comparisons, but I'll kind of show you as we go. So the blade on this is 3 1/4 inches. It is a flat grind. You got this swedge on top. It's a fairly thin blade. It is Elmax steel, which is a really, really nice high-end steel. However, the problem with this blade is the grind, okay? It cuts well. It's not that I've tried to cut stuff and it wouldn't work. However, it's a very thick grind. The edge geometry is more like what I would expect to find on like a hard-use bushcrafting knife or something like that. It's really thick behind the edge here. And that means right now I can tell you this is razor sharp. It will shave hair easily, but it won't cut phone book paper well because that edge is quite thick. Another good example is if you were to cut some fruit up with this, you would find it splitting. Let's say if you cut an apple, it would split the apple rather than actually slice through it. Now compare that to another blade of similar size, the Spyderco Domino. This blade is very lean, very slim, and cuts the way you'd expect a knife of this size and this philosophy of use to cut. Okay, so that's one of the drawbacks, is the thickness on this blade, and especially considering, as I said, the role that this knife fits as sort of a gentleman's folder, as an elegant, slim knife. Okay, so the blade is excellent. The grind is beautiful. The lines on here, it's really, really well done. Very, very attractive blade. You can probably see Lionsteel and Elmax there. So great knife, really attractive. And generally for EDC tasks it works fine. You'll just find that the odd thing you go to do, it doesn't do well because it's quite thick. And normally that's not a huge deal. I have other knives that have a similar edge geometry that are a pretty thick grind, but it's just out of place on this particular knife, if that makes sense. It doesn't make sense with the overall look of the knife and the feel of the knife and the philosophy of the knife. All right, so what about lockup and deployment? Well, as you can see, it is a titanium frame lock. The lock engages about 50% with the blade there, you can see here. One drawback I would say to this is the Teflon washers. Lionsteel always uses Teflon washers, and they perform well, okay? I'm not really saying, I'm sorry, I shouldn't move that around. I'm not saying they don't perform well, but I am saying this. This knife has zero blade play. It's really, really solid. But if I really pull, I can get just a little bit of flex. You probably won't be able to see it, but I can get that blade to flex a little bit. And the reason for that is I'm actually, when I push hard in this direction or that direction, I'm actually smushing the washers. Like Teflon will give a little bit. So I'm actually smushing down the top end of the washer and making the blade, just flex ever so slightly. And that's just one of the drawbacks of Teflon washers. Overall, I just feel like phosphor bronze is a better choice, and certainly would have preferred to see that in this knife. Okay, one thing I will say about these knives, this one and the SR1 as well, if you go to take the blade out of this, it's a bit of a fiasco, okay? Because remember, you cannot take this apart, okay? There's no taking one scale off the way we would normally do. This is a solid piece of titanium. So you've got to slide it out and slide it back in while somehow keeping the washers in place, which does present a bit of a challenge. Otherwise, lockup and deployment are very good. It's extremely smooth, okay? Extremely smooth. I would actually compare it to a Sebenza for its feel. Where it's you're not going to flick it out really fast, but it's not about speed. It's just about this very smooth feel that it does have, no question about it. So deployment is very good, lockup is very good, very strong. Just those washers I'm not crazy about. Let's finally now move on to this handle, which if you were to say make a list of the most beautiful production knives on the market, I think some Amkustas would go on the list. But I think this knife would definitely find its way onto that list. This is an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous knife. It's hard to really overstate. I'm going to try to zoom in even a little bit more and see if I can do that. There you go. This knife is absolutely beautiful. There's no question about that whatsoever. You can see this starburst pattern into the matte finish on the titanium. Just beautiful, beautiful blade. Now, the comfort on this is is fairly good, okay? Certainly nothing wrong with it, but at the same time, it is quite small, okay? I feel like this is a knife, and the style of this knife as well, I actually feel like this knife could be, you know, another inch at least, and be more like the knife that it was meant to be, okay? Let me back out now that I've kind of given you that bit of a close-up. I still want to talk about the handle, but while I'm doing that, I want to bring in a couple of comparisons. I want to have room for those in frame. So, solid piece of titanium. Lanyard hole is definitely big enough for 550 cord. Pocket clip is single position, but it is very workable, comfortable, easy to get in and out of pocket. Absolutely gorgeous, comfortable in hand, and this milled out pattern, this sort of starburst pattern, does actually provide some grip, although I wouldn't call this a tactical knife or a combat knife. I hate that word tactical, but this knife is definitely not designed to be used in a combat setting. Now, speaking of this handle, there are a couple little things that I want to point out. Part of this, I guess, is lockup. Let me bring in, here's a good example. This is the ZT0562. There is a stainless steel lock bar insert here. There's not one here. There is an over travel stop here. There's not one here. I would like to see both those things on this knife, just because it is, you know, the lock bar is pretty slim, and I think it could use that extra support. All right. So that's one thing that I think is missing. And by the way, the price point on this is way, way, way lower, and it does have those two little extras, which I think are quite good. So yeah, here's another example, ZT801. Again, there is both an over travel stop and a lock bar insert. They're the same piece of stainless steel in this case that interfaces with the blade tang. So yeah, 801, and you can see the size as well. The 801 is more the size that I would want to carry. The 801 is on the small end of my preferred scale anyway. One more example. This is the Spyderco Domino. I would say this is a very similar philosophy of use to this, sort of a light use or gentleman's EDC. Yeah, I mean, you could flex it into some harder tasks, but the blade is not really long enough to be any kind of combat or ready or anything like that. Now, again, you have similar materials. You have what I would argue is at least as good as a steel, and there is a Domino that has the CTS 204P, which I would suggest is maybe even a better steel than LMAX. I don't know, everyone wouldn't agree with me on that, but the point that I want to make is the price point on this is fairly steep. The other knives that I've shown you, although comparable, are about half the price. Not quite, some are you know, 2/3 the price or something like that. But anyway, so overall, very good knife. Okay, certainly, I know I mentioned a couple of little drawbacks here and there. The reason I mentioned those is more because, let me zoom back out here and come back into frame. The reason I mention those is the sheer amount of money that a person is spending on this blade, okay? This is a very expensive knife, and so I think I'm being fair in holding it to a slightly higher standard, okay? If this was a $200 knife, if it was a $150 knife, you couldn't say anything bad about it because it's above and beyond, okay, for that price point. But this is almost a $400 knife, and for $400, I like to see some extras, okay? I like to see a stainless steel lock bar insert here. I'd like to see an over travel stop, although in this roll, not necessary. I'd like to see a thinner grind here. So that's my, you know, those are my complaints about this knife, while also pointing out that there are a lot of positives. You know, it's certainly lightweight. It's amazing in terms of its looks. Possibly, again, one of the most beautiful knives that I've ever had in my hands. Absolutely gorgeous. It does carry well. It does cut well. It is very well made. The fit and finish on this is just perfection. Very, very high sort of cool factor. Very, very high pride of ownership. So if those are the kinds of things, you know, if you're a person who likes fine watches and jewelry, if you like, you know, if you want the car that has all of the little extras, this is a good knife for you. You know, it's certainly a very high class, high pride of ownership type of knife. If you tend to be someone who, you know, is not as into all of those things, if you're more into just, hey, I like nice knives and I want to be able to use them, this will certainly, it'll still fit the bill. It's a very nice knife, very usable, very durable, very well put together, but just not as well put together, or maybe, I don't know, just not the perfect all-around knife for an EDC. It's probably a little too fine and a little too expensive. It's more like, you know, the person who carries this knife, maybe the same person who wears a very expensive watch every day. Okay, so that's my take on the Lionsteel Tispine. Honestly, one of the most beautiful knives I have ever seen. This thing is phenomenal. There were a couple complaints. Oh, one thing I should point out, I guess I should have talked about this when I was zoomed in, but anyway, if you're still watching, it would have been cool if they had milled this out a little further. They could have, I would have liked to see them leave less material in this handle, but it's not the end of the world. It doesn't affect function in any way, it just adds a little weight. So there you go, guys. That's my take on the Lionsteel Tispine. Beautiful, beautiful work of art, but still very functional. Good steel, good fit and finish, you know, all those things that we look for in a high-end folder. A little on the small side, so, you know, with some very minuscule changes, okay? I mean, very minuscule changes. This could be like the most perfect knife ever made. The way it is, it's still a great knife, it's just not amazing, okay? I like it, I don't love it, is I guess the easiest way to give you my overall assessment of this blade. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we will talk to you soon.